the clockwork of chaos and the echoes of doubt beneath the lacework satire of Candide, under the fluttering veil of wit and philosophical jabs. There lies a constellation of themes orbiting around a sunless center. These themes are not merely ideological markers, but gravitational force, drawing the reader into a subtle dance of destruction and rebirth, of cosmic musings and gut-level truths. Voltaire, ever the cosmic trickster, sculpts these themes not with the hammer of theory, but with the chisel of experience, carving them into the very architecture of the tale. At the nucleus of the narrative spins a single, radiant paradox: optimism wrapped in the smoke of disaster. The philosophy of Pangloss, echoing Leibniz, is the persistent assertion that all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. It is an idea both noble and narcotic, noble in its pursuit of divine order, narcotic in its willful blindness to agony. It allows Candide, in his earliest incarnation, to gaze upon floggings, shipwrecks, executions, and disease with a kind of stunned serenity. This brand of optimism becomes not just a philosophical stance, but a spell, a dream, clung to in a nightmare. The more violently the world shatters, the more feverishly Pangloss clutches his rosary of logic, muttering platitudes like prayers to a deaf god. But Voltaire, that sly demiurge, invites us to consider a deeper question. What happens when belief becomes so absolute that it silences the soul? Optimism, in Candide, is not hope, it is inertia. It is the philosophical equivalent of a man bleeding to death while insisting that the red puddle at his feet is evidence of divine mercy. Through the relentless battering of Candide's journey, Voltaire tests optimism like gold in fire, revealing not its purity but its brittleness. In this world, hope is not a crown worn proudly, but a mask pulled over wounds too vast to comprehend. Yet Voltaire does not rest in the ashes of disillusionment. If optimism fails, he seems to ask, then what shall rise in its place? Perhaps experience, perhaps skepticism, perhaps action. And yet, even these are offered not as commandments, but as questions whispered. Beneath the din of explosions and collapsing philosophies, it is no accident that Candide rarely chooses his path. Rather, he is buffeted like a seed in the wind, carried by war, lust, hunger, and chance. The theme of agency or its absence looms like a phantom. Is Candide truly growing, or merely enduring? Do we shape our reality, or are we shaped by it, blindly reenacting the ideas we inherited? This leads us into another labyrinth, the theme of suffering. Suffering in Candide is not metaphorical or abstract. It is grotesque, physical. Visceral bodies are dismembered, enslaved, hanged, flogged, and violated with a frequency that borders on operatic parody. Yet beneath the exaggeration lies a stark mirror of human history. Voltaire does not invent suffering for theatrical flair. He plucks it from the headlines of his own century. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755, the Inquisition, colonial brutality, religious hypocrisy. In each horror, he embeds a grain of realism inside the pearl of satire, forcing the reader to confront the fact that beneath the laughter lies a scream. Still, it is not just suffering that pulses through this novel's veins, is the absurdity of assigning it meaning. Candide seeks answers, but what he finds are contradictions dressed as truths. Martin, his dear companion, embodies this, a counterweight to Pangloss, offering a cynical, almost mechanistic view of the universe. For Martin, misfortune is not a puzzle to be solved, but the very nature of existence. And yet, even his certainty frays at the edges. He is not the truth, only another mask. Voltaire seems to suggest that both optimism and pessimism, when rigidly held, become prisons to walls, enclosing a corridor of doubt through which the wise must pass. Religion, too, becomes a theme not as doctrine but as distortion. Nearly every religious figure in Candide is a hypocrite, a fraud, or a predator. Jesuit generals, inquisitorial torturers, and lecherous monks populate the landscape, casting long, satirical shadows over the institutions that claimed moral authority. In Voltaire's world, but here again, Voltaire's genius lies in ambiguity. He is not simply mocking faith, but rather the corruption that twists it into a tool of power. What Candide mourns is not the absence of the divine, but the human compulsion to speak for the divine while committing atrocities. It is a sobering reminder that belief, when detached from compassion, becomes just another weapon, and in this wild architecture of ruined ideas and burnt temples, love wavers like a candle in a storm. Candide's obsession with Cunegonde begins as a tender flame, becomes a guiding beacon, and ends as a hollow flicker. By the time he finds her again after traversing countenance and catastrophizer, she has become unrecognizable, both physically and metaphorically. The ideal he once cherished has been distorted by reality, and his love, once pristine and poetic, now feels obligatory and uncertain. This, too, is a theme: the decay of ideals when they are tested by time and touch. Voltaire asks if love can survive the crucible of reality, or if it too is a fantasy we chase, only to be disillusioned when we finally arrive. Amid these swirling currents, one final, quieter theme begins to emerge, a whisper beneath the philosophical shouting. It is the idea of simplicity, of labor, of choosing small, tangible acts over vast, abstract dreams. It arrives as a humble murmur in the book's final moments, yet it carries the weight of a revelation. Let us cultivate our garden, Candide says, not as an escape, but as an embrace. After witnessing the collapse of optimism, the theater of horror, and the futility of grand systems, what remains is not despair, but the soil, the garden, the act of tending, of working, of engaging with the immediate world, not as an answer, but as a practice. Here, Voltaire sketches a possibility, not a utopia, not a divine order, but a lived philosophy. To cultivate the garden is to touch the earth with both hands, to seek meaning not in destiny or design, but in effort and attentiveness. It is a theme that speaks not only to the Enlightenment, but to every era plagued by disillusionment. In a world fractured by ideology and delusion, the garden is not paradise, it is survival. So the themes of Candide twine like ivy: optimism and its unraveling, suffering and its absurdity, the corruption of faith, the frailty of love, the pull of agency against the tide of fate, and finally, the small salvation found in doing what is real and near. Together, they do not form a doctrine, but a mosaic, one that asks us not to believe, but to see, not to follow, but to dig. Beneath the laughter, beneath the pain, there lies something alive, something waiting to grow. The delicate machinery of folly and wisdom to wander through Candide is to witness the grand opera of human thought, where each aria is sung in the key of irony, and every chorus chants the refrain of contradiction. Voltaire, that master conductor, orchestrates a symphony of ideas so deftly that the listener or reader finds themselves swaying between laughter and despair, between nodding in agreement and throwing up their hands in exasperation. At its heart, the novel is a dismantling of certainties, a playful yet merciless interrogation of the philosophies that humans cling to like life rafts in a stormy sea. The folly of unquestioned optimism, the most glaring theme, of course, is the mockery of Leibnizian optimism, the belief that our world, despite its evident horrors, is the best of all possible worlds. Dr. Pangloss, Candide's tutor, and the novel's resident philosopher, embodies this creed with a fidelity so blind it borders on the pathological. Even when the world serves him nothing but suffering, when he is hanged but survives, when he is dissected but survives, when he contracts syphilis but finds it a necessary part of the cosmic plan, he clings to his mantra like a drowning man to a sinking ship. Voltaire's satire here is surgical. He does not merely dismiss optimism, he dissects it to reveal the rot beneath. Pangloss's philosophy is not just wrong, it is dangerous. It is a narcotic that numbs its adherents to the reality of suffering, a mental trick that turns atrocity into abstraction. When Lisbon is destroyed by an earthquake, Pangloss does not mourn the dead. He theorizes about the seismic necessity of the event. In this, Voltaire exposes a timeless human tendency, the urge to explain away pain rather than confront it, the illusion of philosophical systems beyond optimism. Candide takes aim at the very idea that any single philosophy can encapsulate the chaos of existence. The novel is a parade of ideologies: optimism, pessimism, nihilism. Hedonism is shown to be inadequate in the face of lived experience. Martin, the melancholic scholar who accompanies Candide in the latter half of the book, serves as counterpoint, espousing a grim determinism that is just as rigid, just as flawed. Voltaire's message is not that all philosophies are equally worthless, but that dogma itself is the enemy. The moment a system of thought hardens into unquestioned doctrine, it becomes another prison. Candide, ever the student, begins by absorbing Pangloss's teachings without question, but his journey forces him to outgrow them. His education is not in finding a better philosophy, but in learning to distrust any philosophy that claims to have all the answers. The cruelty of power and privilege beneath the philosophical banter. Candide is also a scathing indictment of power, religious, political, and economic. The Inquisition burns heretics, not for justice, but for spectacle. Kings wage wars over trivial disputes while peasants starve. The Church preaches humility while hoarding wealth. Voltaire, ever the provocateur, delights in exposing the hypocrisy of institutions that claim moral authority while perpetuating oppression. And yet, he does not let the individual off the hook. The aristocrats of Thunder Tent Trank, convinced of their own superiority, are as ridiculous as they are vile. Cunegonde, once a noble beauty, becomes a commodity traded between men. Even Candide, for all his innocence, benefits from luck and privilege. His survival often hinges on wealth or connections that others lack. Voltaire's world is one where power corrupts, but also where the powerless are not inherently noble. They are simply trying to survive. The search for meaning in a chaotic world, amid the wreckage of philosophies and institutions. Candide journey becomes a search for something more durable than ideology, meaning. Not a grand, universal meaning, but a personal one. His famous conclusion, "We must cultivate our garden," is neither a surrender nor a triumph. It is an acknowledgement that the world is vast and indifferent, but within our small sphere of influence, we can create something worthwhile. The garden is not a metaphor for retreat, but for engagement, not with grand theories, but with the tangible, messy work of living. It is an antidote to both Pangloss's blind faith and Martin's corrosive despair. In this, Voltaire offers a quiet radicalism, the idea that meaning is not given, but made.